All right, team. So today is another trainer talk. Today, Mikey wanted to go over programming explained. So the title of this lecture is going to be Controlled Chaos. As you can see by the whiteboard, it kind of ties in because there's a lot that's going on, and we're going to try to explain programming. I mentioned a second ago that there's a lot more to it than I have on this board, and we can have entire week's worth of lectures on it. So I'm going to try to condense the information as best as possible, make it digestible. Somehow, I'm going to try to fit in posture control and bench press because Mikey said so. So this is his lecture, this is what he wants, so I'm going to try to get it to him as best as possible. So as we go into this, I'm going to be kind of throwing out terms, and it might seem a little redundant or confusing, so stop me at any point if you need to raise your hand. Please feel free to ask. But before we get into the nitty gritty, we need to go over what we're actually doing and what the point of this plan is. So I have controlled chaos up here in quotes. It's actually a quote when I was at Cal State Fullerton. One of my professors, Dr. Andy Galpin, great professor, mentioned this in terms of when he explained programming periodization and kind of designing your plan. One of his buddies said you want to have controlled chaos in the gym, right? You want to have a plan, you want to go in with a plan of attack, but you never know what can happen, so you have to be adaptable. So life happens and everything's not going to be perfect. So you need to have a structured plan, but also allow some sort of flexibility and variability in that training program, because not everything is in a test tube, right? It's not going to be clinically, scientifically, like super perfect. So controlled chaos, some plan is better than no plan. And when it comes to creating your plan, we need to understand some definitions. So progressive overload and Hans Selye's general adaptation syndrome, or G.A.S. for short. Anyone have an idea of what progressive overload is, or just can infer what it means just based on the words in the term?
Just with over time, adding weight, increasing the weight.
Right, yeah, progressively adding more and more load, right? Overload, progressive overload. It's a continuous building of intensity or volume or shortened rest or whatever, however you want to progress exercise. There's not 100, but I mean there's many different ways you can progress exercise other than adding weight. Okay, so that's something that's very important. So progressive overload, so we're giving the body a reason to adapt. And has anyone ever heard of Hans Selye or general adaptation syndrome? No one's ever heard that before? Okay, cool. So I believe Hans Selye came up with this in the 1930s, around there, to try to figure out how he can train the American soldiers and keep them healthy while also rehabbing injuries. And so what he started finding out was people adapt best, or not best, but adapt through a certain process of adaptation. So in general, we seem to adapt according to this line. So on the y-axis, we have training intensity. And again, we can progress this: weight, volume, shortened rest, frequency of workouts within the week, you name it. So, and then on the x-axis, we have time. So we have intensity training as a function of time. And off to the left, you see what these all represent, but B1 is your starting original baseline, okay? Now, this orange line, it represents the way that our body is going to be adapting. So we have point number 1 here is the introduction of that training stimulus. So let's say this person that's first coming to the gym, haven't worked out before in their life, and you're taking them through their first workout after doing the fit appointment. So the body receives this stimulus and has to overtrain a little bit to try to match the intensity or the newer intensity of that exercise. And as it starts to train through that, the following hours, let's say the next day, we run into point number 2 as this curve starts sloping downwards. This is called the alarm phase. Where the body has just been punched in the face and, whoa, I never felt this before, I have no idea what's going on, I need to figure this out so I don't get hurt and don't let this happen again. So now in the alarm phase, your client might, or you might feel a little more fatigued, tired, sore. That's a normal process. That's something that's supposed to happen within reason, but it's supposed to happen because, again, we're giving our body a reason to adapt. And as we start going through that adaptation syndrome, we start going into point number 3, which is that resistance phase. So this resistance phase is now where the body is starting to take hold of those adaptations and start the process of not allowing that to happen the same way again, getting bigger, faster, stronger, more endurant, whatever it might be. But it starts progressing and adapting above that original baseline. And point number 4 is known as super compensation. Now, normally when I bring up compensation, it's a bad thing. It's like a compensation model where we have limited shoulder range of motion, so we have to flare the elbows out in our bench press. I'm gonna try to throw bench press into this as much as possible because I probably won't be able to get to too much on posture and bench press because this is really important, but I'll try my best. So super compensation here though is a really good thing because now our body is surging beyond that old baseline and setting in those new adaptations. So now we've reached and are seeking to at least maintain baseline number 2. So this is our newly adapted baseline that we are now training at. This can be the following week, this could be the next workout, whatever it is. This isn't limited to weeks, months, years. It can be day to day as well, or workout to workout. So now we have this new baseline. We follow that same process. So alarm phase, or an introduction of that newer, higher stimulus, alarm phase, resistance, super compensation, and so on. But then we have a really steep decline in training intensity and your ability to perform. And this happens when we reach the exhaustion phase, because this isn't something that's going to be linearly progressing or curvilinearly progressing to infinity, right? At some point, we're going to reach a point of diminishing returns, and if we don't understand what that actually is or when that's occurring, you can start to take a lot of steps backwards and really start avoiding out a lot of progress that you made. So this exhaustion phase is exactly what we're trying to avoid, and trying to avoid dipping down below not only the original or the baseline 2 that we newly adapted to, but we're trying to especially avoid dropping below our original baseline. And this can happen also because of injury, again, just because of overtraining. But this exhaustion phase is exactly what we're trying to avoid by going through the rest of this. Have I lost anyone so far on this introduction? Because this is pretty important to get down first. Yeah.
I can't read number 1. What does that say again?
Here?
Yeah. Introduction
of training stimulus.
Yeah. Thanks.
Any other questions so far? Vic, I think you had a question.
Yeah. Like the effect of the norepinephrine, and if it, like you said, you can have too much.
Yeah, so we have different hormones in our body for very particular reasons. We have, it's controlled by our sympathetic and parasympathetic and our endocrine systems, but the parasympathetic and sympathetic are more related to what you're talking about. So that sympathetic nervous system is that fight or flight, adrenal, like big rush of energy, gotta do something, right? Someone's talking crap on me and my girl, and I need to decide, am I gonna fight this guy, or am I just gonna count my losses, walk away, and you never know, this person might have a gun on them, might have a knife on them, you never know, right? So it's that decision though, like, what am I gonna do? And so that's that adrenal response, right? And that's a survival mechanism, but there is such a thing as too much of a good thing, where you're constantly receiving that higher stimulus of the norepinephrine, and then your body starts to, because the stress response to that, your body also starts producing a hormone called cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone, and that's a good thing. It's good to have in balance in play, but you start having too much of that in your body. Now that starts taking your testosterone, breaks it up, and converts it into estrogen. So, and then if you're a guy that's trying to build muscle, maintain lean mass, and train consistently, then you're not going to want to do that, right? That's probably one of the last things you ever want to try to get into. So, even though it may seem like, oh, I want to be in fight and flight all the time, no, you don't. Just think when you have like finals and you're really stressed out, studying late nights, waking up, cramming before the test, taking the test is stressful, trying to balance everything else around finals week. you don't want to be in that state for very long, right? That's a very like, you gotta perform now and then potentially pay the price later. But this is what I have to handle right this second. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That answer your question?
Yeah.
And so what this is trying to do is not only limit the amount of stress you're receiving from the training or that fight or flight stimulus, but then also potentially be able to control when that peaks and hit that at the right time for potential competition or an interview or a final exam, right? Whatever it might be. And this, just like our discussion last week, a lot of the stuff I'm going to be talking about when it comes to training and all that has its equivalents in real life, everyday activity. So we can think of this in terms of weight training, but then also how we handle life and plan around that. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Nope, cool. So now we will go into the anatomy of a program. So it actually makes up the programs, and it can seem like a big, arduous task where you have to really sit down for hours and hours trying to plan out a year's worth of workouts. But really, if you take a certain approach to it, it's much easier. So I'll start off with the big picture first, the macro cycle. So this is the big overall plan to reach a certain goal. So like, let's say it's a professional athlete, or really any athlete, not just professional, but and they have a season, an off season, a season, a postseason, an off season, a preseason, and repeats, right? So that'd be like a year-long training plan composed of those parts. Now here I have it's usually a year, but that's in like general population. Let's say we have an Olympic athlete, their training cycles are 4 years in length. Their macro cycle is 4 years, and each year might be its own mesocycle, whereas for someone else, their whole year is one giant macro cycle. Does that make sense so far? So I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but our macro cycle is just a big overall overarching plan, trying to get to a long-term goal, and then breaking that up into mesocycles, which are the medium-term sections that make up that macro cycle. And we can think of these in terms of weeks or months, month-long cycles, but don't limit it to just weeks or months. Again, this can be segments of time smaller than the macro cycle. Okay, so macrocycle big, mesocycle medium, and then finally microcycle. These are our short-term plan that makes up each mesocycle, and they're usually in terms of days or weeks. Again, don't limit it to just that. It's just an example. But we have our short-term leading to our medium-term that ends up in our long-term big goal. So far, so we're just creating. What did we talk about last week? That this probably sounds very similar to with our development high school athlete discussions. Smart goals, right? You want to have a specific goal, right? That's measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. This helps set that up for you. So it's just a more structured way of thinking about things. So, any questions about the anatomy of the program? No? Okay, cool. I'm rushing through it because that's just a lot I want to get to, especially on this next section. So,